Welcome to the Inner Alignment Podcast, a neuroscience approach to healing anxiety and depression caused by childhood trauma stored in the body. With the right tools, healing long-term anxiety and depression is completely possible when you heal at root cause. Join me as we expand boundaries in the field of trauma recovery with the revolutionary Inner Alignment System, a 6-layered approach to addressing stored trauma in every layer of the body. Hey, you guys, welcome to the Inner Alignment Soul Retrieval for Childhood Trauma podcast. I am your host, Kim Beekman, and today I am joined with Jessica Desrosiers, a trauma psychologist. Today, we're going to be digging into traditional approaches to mental health from a psychologist perspective and what traditional clinical therapy can do in people's personal clinical practices to augment the inner alignment concepts of trauma packets and Ayurvedic doshas and the chakras and the layers of the body, so that mental health field can ultimately become more robust in what they can offer in an integrative and more holistic way. So Jessica is married with 3 children, 2 daughters and a son who has passed and is now in angelic form right here with us today. She lives in Delaware and has been working as a clinical psychologist since 2005, specializing in trauma while working with various populations, including those who are incarcerated and veterans. She's trained in several evidence-based treatment modalities for trauma, such as EMDR, cognitive processing therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, prolonged exposure, dialectical behavioral therapy, emotional freedom technique, and seeking safety. She's treated hundreds of individuals who experience PTSD, both complex and single incident. And Jessica has also founded her complementary practice, Soulful Presence, and she practices alternative and complementary practices in that practice. She offers spiritual coaching, energy healing, and she is also an inner alignment soul retrieval healer. So welcome, Jessica. I'm so honored. I'm really excited to have you here. To have a psychologist give insight from inner alignment perspective is truly a gift. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kim. It's an honor to be here, and I'm excited to talk about this stuff. Like you said, the individuals that I treat, there's typically not single incident trauma or individuals who've experienced single incident trauma. They're more complex PTSD cases, with most individuals experiencing some level of trauma from a very young age, and then likely experiencing more and more trauma throughout the years. So anyway, coming back to how I conceptualize these individuals in these cases is typically I come from a very psychodynamic approach, which is when somebody comes in to see me, whatever their presenting problem is, I want to know what happened in childhood to get to this space that they're presenting in, to get to their issues currently. Because typically, I think it all roots back to something that's occurred within their childhood, whether it's big T or little t trauma, or some level of difficulty or stressor there. So whatever they present with, they come in with their presenting problem, and then we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I start to look at what are the patterns of behavior, what are their patterns of thought, what are their patterns of emotion, where do they get stuck, where do they spiral, so on and so forth, and where did this all start from? Right? And once we can figure out where it all started from or rooted down to or source to, then we can go in and start to work on those issues.
You work both in, I wouldn't call it traditional, but you have an integrative approach as a psychologist with somatic practices that you do. And then you have a separate complementary and alternative practice. Can you just at a high level tell me the difference in those two approaches and what that looks like separated out as a psychologist out in the world today?
Yeah, so that has definitely shifted over time. I think when I first got out of grad school back in 2005, I was very much by the books, and we use evidence-based treatment, and it's very standardized and manualized and so on and so forth. And then once I got into the real world and worked with more and more people, that just doesn't fit with the majority of people. So the 8 to 12 sessions, that sounds great. And that may work actually to work through a single incident event in adulthood, traumatic event rather, but not necessarily to go into more of those complex issues. So however, I worked in environments that were very structured and very bureaucratic, whether with veterans or within the military system or within the prisons, as you said before. So they required more evidence-based. They wanted you to use evidence-based therapy and to get people out in a shorter period of time. We didn't have years to work on therapy because there were so many individuals who needed help, psychological help. When I then went into my own psychological or started my own psychological practice is where I was able to kind of distance myself, not necessarily from the techniques within the evidence-based therapy, but from the manualized, standardized, this is how you do it, each session looks like this. And I really developed more of an integrative approach, looking at the individual's, of course, childhood and their attachment issues in childhood have affected their current space that they're in, and then utilizing techniques from all of the therapies that you said before, but it often is a very much an integrative approach, looking at all the layers or all the parts of the body, not just the mind, not just the emotions, not just the physical parts.
We're going to talk about your inner alignment journey, but how has that changed at a high level? You mentioned something about top down versus bottom up. Can you just give a sense at a high level what that looks like when you were more kind of structured in your psychology practice, and now that you have integrated so much into your own practice?
Mm-hmm. So the top down is very much the talk therapies, right? So the top down is we're going to look at your thoughts. We're going to see how those thoughts influence your behavior and your emotions. And we're going to stay and the consequences and maybe some of the physical stuff, right? So that's kind of the top down approach.
Yeah.
With the bottom up approach is what's happening in your body right now? What are you noticing, right? So more of that mindfulness based, coming back into the present moment. What are you noticing right now? What's coming up for you? All right, let's allow that to be present. Let's lean into that, right? Let's lean into it rather than avoiding it like we want to do. Let's lean in, let's feel that, and then let's see what else that connects to. And if we're able to give these physical symptoms per se that you're having some space, then really what that does is it allows the physical tension or the physical ways that the trauma manifests in the body, it allows that to release just by leaning into it.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that is beautiful. And I think, as you were talking, I was thinking that top-down approach of the thoughts and talk therapy from the mental body, by the time someone's done their 10 years of therapy and comes into inner alignment, we have to almost undo all of the analysis paralysis of the mental body, because the top down doesn't allow the body into it's almost like there is no down, it's just top, right?
We're just here.
We're just here. We're just from the chin up, and we're living as a head, thinking lots of thoughts and going in circles. And so that when you go from the bottom up in that way that we do it here in inner alignment, the mind is really a secondary aspect to what's living in the body. And holy cow, what a paradigm shift to what has been which has been done for, I think, hundreds of years, which is the analysis of thoughts.
Correct. Very much so. And I don't think it's good or bad or right or wrong, what the analysis of the thoughts. I think that's a piece of it, but we can't stay in that. And if we do, in that intellectual space, in that defensive space, then we're never going to heal really what's underlying all of that. So by going from the bottom, if I'm able to go into my physical sensations, then my thoughts and my emotions and my memories or so on and so forth are just going to come up. They're going to bubble up. And so then we can start to look at that, right? We can start to lean into those things, not necessarily analyzing them, but just allowing them to be present.
Yeah.
It's huge, because with trauma, we want to run the other way. We don't want to feel that discomfort. We're biologically wired to run away from pain and seek pleasure.
Yeah. we do like people to have a certain number of years of therapy under their belts. Like that builds awareness and the ability to look at patterns or to be able to see, oh, I'm responsible for this. When I do this, this happens, right? That level of self-awareness that's built in therapy, clinical therapy, traditional talk therapy, can be really valuable to develop the awareness layer of the body.
Totally.
So that is the good part of just traditional talk therapy, is that someone hopefully will build some level of self-awareness through
Yes.
talking about their issues and being heard and being received and having a space for themselves. Like, I'm a big advocate that when my kids turn a certain age, I'm like, okay, let's find you a therapist. Like, don't you want to talk to someone outside of our family and process your thoughts and emotions? Right? Some of them have taken to it, some of them haven't, and my three daughters, but it is a valuable experience to have space held and to start to
It,
develop self-awareness.
Mhm.
Great. So can you share first about your healing process after the trauma of losing your son and how your spiritual awareness and capacities opened after those years?
Yeah. So back in 2011, I lost my son to a terminal illness. And following that, I went into a complete, I would say, freeze mode, and maybe with a little bit of flight in there, here and there, where I just shut down and was angry, was everything felt kind of surreal. I was really disassociated and detached. And I think I stayed in that place for several years and treated patients just fine. And those evidence-based therapies, just, well, I think just fine, but who knows?
Yeah.
Because if you're able to stay up here, you don't have to go down, right? So that worked out well. When I worked at the VA, there was a coworker, and he offered meditation for all the psychologists, and it was a chakra meditation. I don't remember exactly what he did, but we went through each of the chakras, and then once we got to, I believe it was the third eye or the crown chakra, I just started bawling my eyes out, and my son came in to speak to me, and I was like, okay, either I'm losing my shit or like this is really him. Like, I don't know what's happening. And I just kept crying and crying and crying because it was just a beautiful, beautiful experience that I didn't even think was possible. So following that, I was like, okay, well, I got to know more about this stuff. Like, what are these chakras? What is this? What's really happening here? So I started to explore my own spirituality through, well, actually, I think the first thing I did was, maybe it's time to start to work on the grief of my son, and rather than remaining in this detached space. So I started getting trained in EMDR and simultaneously found a therapist to do the EMDR on me, starting with my son, starting with the trauma of losing him, which was amazing. I learned a lot through the training and through my own therapy, and was able to really connect to the grief and the trauma without being in a place of heightened reactivity, or without having to go into the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. I was able to be present with my emotions. I was less reactive, so on and so forth. My body came back to a place of neutrality, more balance. So that was great. When we used the EMDR to work on more developmental childhood traumas, I felt like there was certainly shifts, and there was new ways of being in the world, but but there was still this underlying shame and kind of sense of worthlessness that I just carried with me. Like, that didn't go anywhere. I mean, it went somewhere with my son, right? I no longer blame myself for his death and things like that, but it didn't shift in relation to the younger parts of me.
Wow, I've never heard someone make that distinction so clearly, but being trained in EMDR, having received EMDR, having had your own trauma, that distinction is just so helpful to understand, because I see a lot of that too. I see that EMDR does help with reactivity for people, and it
Huge.
does help in some way with trauma in not being as reactive, and body keeps the score, right? This is becoming more a traditional treatment, but there was something that I couldn't touch or explain, that there was a deeper thing. It works at and more than the mental layer of the body.
Yes.
So it works on
Yes.
a couple layers of the body. What layers of the body do you think it works on?
It definitely works on the emotional level. It
Okay.
definitely works on the mental level, and it definitely works on the physical level.
Okay.
Because the point is to get the person to a place of neutrality and or more balance in their thoughts, in their body, and in their emotions.
Okay.
So by through the bilateral stimulation.
I'd love to split hairs here if you could humor me, because and this is so juicy for me, you guys, because I sit around and these are the things that I noodle around in my head, thinking about the layers of the body, thinking about the clients who come in who've done EMDR, and it feels like I always explain it like there's a surface and there's a hole at the top of the surface, and then there's like rabbit holes underneath the surface, right? And it
Mhm.
feels like EMDR gets a few feet under the surface and then covers up the top of the hole, but there's still lower parts of the rabbit hole deep below that didn't get touched. So that's what I'll typically say as an analogy, because I'm visual in that sense. And so what you're doing is you're giving me some language, because it's interesting. You said it hits the mental, emotional, and physical, maybe the neurosynaptic aspects, or I know
Yeah.
there's the eye movement. So there is very much the nervous system is being affected. And then
Yeah.
that kind of makes me wonder, I'm like, okay, but the body and the somatics of the body, is that the energetic? Is that the spiritual layer? There's still a physical part of somatic. Do you
Yes.
see? So now, like, there's a
Yeah.
nuance here that's
There
really
is.
important.
And, but it's so interesting. So having been trained in attachment focused EMDR,
Mhm.
it's much more based on childhood trauma complex PTSD than the traditional EMDR. And having that, there's a lot more resourcing or pulling in, like, let's say your adult self, pulling in the divine figure, a nurturing figure, so on and so forth, to help heal that person within that space. So,
So
right?
EMDR is getting expanded to go a little bit further
Yes.
down the rabbit hole that
Yes.
we've been working in inner alignment. And I'm excited about that, you guys. Like,
Yeah.
I just want people to heal at the root, like at the deepest part of that rabbit hole, deep within the earth of their body, or the crust of the body, because it's
Mhm.
when we cover that hole at the surface and people think, oh, I've healed that, I'm not reactive, I should feel healed. But there's this deep, as you described it, I think, as shame, or there's this deep feeling of angst or unworthiness, or there's
Mhm.
this deep lack of love or juice in my life.
Yeah.
That's often like that's the deepest part of that rabbit hole that doesn't get touched very often. And what makes our job a little bit harder is when people have done a lot of EMDR and they've done like half of the rabbit hole, they go in through that pathway, and that pathway in is a very different pathway in than the
Very.
inner alignment pathway. To like, we take a different route and we go to the deepest part, and then we
Yes.
move up the rabbit hole, bottom up approach.
Yeah.
And so I have never really had that description or those words. And it's really fun to hear kind of from a practitioner where we're getting to. And they're different pathways. Like, I'm learning a lot about digestion and metabolic pathways, and how, like, when people go into ketosis, they're using this pathway of metabolism. And if they're eating carbs, they go through this pathway of metabolism. It kind of feels the same. Like, there are just, it's
Different ways.
completely different paths,
Yes.
and they're not the same paths at all. Thank you for that description. It just, for me, I'm like, I'm having a field day and inside my head with understanding.
I'm glad you're excited about this. But and I think the another piece that I'm excited about is I recently did a workshop or a conference with somebody who's pretty world renowned in EMDR, and she's writing a new book, I believe, that speaks to the multi generational trauma and how that's held generation to generation to generation, and how that can be added into the piece of the EMDR as well.
Yeah.
So that is beyond huge. There's so much energetic stuff there, and just pulling on our ancestral roots, our strengths from our ancestors, and also maybe cutting off some of the things that aren't so great with that, or integrating them maybe in a different way. Maybe that would be a more accurate way of saying it, not
Yeah.
necessarily
Or a
cutting.
little of both.
Yeah,
Spiritually cutting those cords.
yeah. That's what I was
Yeah.
thinking too. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I love geeking out about those specifics. So thank you.
yeah. But the thing that I find upsetting about that piece is the American Psychological Association doesn't recognize those treatments, like this new stuff coming in, as they don't give they don't give continuing education credits for it. And I think the biggest piece with that is, I think psychology worked long and hard to be a science and to be considered a professional science and doctors. And I think that there's some fear there of, if we go in and adding this stuff, are we pushing ourselves back? I don't know if this is to be true. This is just my thought. Are we pushing ourselves back rather than going forward? So I think the biggest piece is to get more and more research using the techniques that people are now integrating in. And with that research, then we can start getting the clinical, because I see your program, I see that in, counseling. I see the whole program like in a counseling graduate program, so I think we're getting there.
Like you can
Um,
see inner alignment as a
yeah,
graduate program in counseling. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, as a track.
As a track.
Probably be more in a spiritual or like a pastoral type counseling. I think that would be where it would be more accepted or most accepted.
Mhm.
However, having said that, I think we're also, as providers, trying to expand ourselves in terms of what your religion is may not be what my religion is, or spirituality, or my belief system, and so on and so forth. So I think we have to expand anyway, with all of us are so different.
Yeah, it's definitely not one size fits all. And I
No.
think, as we journey into your story a little bit, I think what I'm finding is that we do have a lot of clinical therapists starting to move through inner alignment certification as practitioners. They're coming here to do their work, and then they're becoming practitioners in the modality. And expanding their own consciousness. And as they expand their own consciousness and their own processes, then that will bleed into the way that they see their patients in their practice. However, if the evidence-based traditions of psychology or of the field of mental health are not also growing and expanding to accommodate like new awarenesses coming through the different layers of the body, then there's this, how do I fit this wholeness of who I am and my whole consciousness and understanding of who I am into this box of services that I'm offering my clients. So I really appreciate your being able to distinguish like EMDR and then the attachment-based EMDR and then what's approved and what's not approved for continuing education for clinicians, because I think this is, and I don't mean to be derogatory in saying this, but it's kind of the same issues that the Catholic Church is facing, right? Like, do you let women be priests? Do you let them be married? Like,
Right.
what's the
Well,
stance?
yeah, but we're coming out of a place, or we're, I'm hoping we're coming out of a place of duality, right? So this is the way you do it, and this is wrong. And I think all of our systems have been based in that duality, including psychology, including spirituality or religion, and so on and so forth. But with these younger generations coming in, that's starting to shift, because they're more in the gray area. They're not in the duality as much.
Yeah, it's true.
So because of that, I think they're seeking services that are more integrated, and are going that way themselves to explore getting or being trained in services that are more integrated.
Yeah. Yeah, times are changing, and so is the
Mhm.
consciousness on the planet, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so when you lost your son, you started to learn about chakras, you started to learn techniques in EMDR, and really it sounds like your spiritual senses started to open and expand.
Yeah.
How did that lead you to inner alignment?
Well, it was a very interesting time because it was it's like it just all came at once, you know? It's like the door unlocked and it was like, um, yeah. I found a workshop online, and I believe it was on Facebook, but something that it's like an hour workshop to talk about what is inner alignment soul retrieval. So I was like, hey, okay, let's click on this. So I clicked on this and I watched the inner alignment, and I believe I either called you then or the next day or so on and so forth and said, all right, well, let's talk about this. And then I was like, yeah, I'm interested. And you were like, okay, great. We already have a cohort going. Can you start tomorrow?
Yeah.
So it just all kind of aligned. And I think all of the spirituality and alternative practices that I had been learning and researching were just integrating with the trauma treatment. And I think the IA, the inner alignment, really was a place that helped me solidify some of those concepts.
Brought it together into
Yeah.
one
Mhm.
space.
Yes. Helped me conceptualize it, right? Because I'm very analytical. So it helped me analyze that, like, okay, what does this fit in my world, and how can I make it fit in my world, because this is a huge important piece.
Yeah.
Your spirit, your inner goodness, like, in what I find funny, Kim, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but throughout all of my religious upbringing, in a very staunch Baptist, not once did that religion ever talk about your inner goodness, connecting to your inner goodness, connecting to your heart. Like, it was just absent, right? So I think that was a big pull towards the inner alignment program as well, because it felt very heart-based. It felt very genuine. It felt very accepting, non-judgmental, right? A place that you can heal. And, we all don't have to believe the same thing, but we can still live in a place in our hearts that is supportive, that offers community, and that's compassionate.
Yeah. And love is that place where all of the religions will overlap. There are a few real universal spiritual concepts that have found their way through all religions or through all spiritual belief systems. And love is that. And it's a very human experience. It doesn't
Mhm.
have to be woo-woo at all. It can be very
No.
practical. Love can be very practical.
Hmm. Yeah, I see in my practice now a lot of practicing Catholics, a lot of practicing, Presbyterians, so on and so forth, that are really by the book with what they do. They go to mass every day and everything, but they have this whole level of spirituality where they connect way beyond. And to me, that's what it is,
Yeah.
right? They're connecting, they're speaking to their being above in the light, and that has been the most healing for them,
Yeah.
a big piece of the healing for them.
Yeah. The loving space is a big part of inner alignment and holding the container. And then we have like the rewiring practices in addition to the soul retrieval where we're going down the rabbit hole. Can you just talk from your own experience or from the psychologist experience, either way, what that did for you in the integration process?
Sure. So starting with myself, so when I first entered the program, I think I was very much up here thinking, okay, well, this is going to look like talk therapy and, traditional stuff. Well, wow. It was far from that. And then I think I had mentioned before, like, wow, I didn't realize what I got myself into here, because this is some hard work, and this is some intense work that I'm doing daily to really take care of myself and to really learn what my self-care looks like and who I am in this world separate from my trauma. Yeah. And even the gifts that I received from my trauma, right? So that was intense. So for 2 months, being in a loving space with a community of other individuals working on their trauma, being held with you, with Laura, she was my soul retrieval healer, and Joan was my coach at the time. And just, I was held in such a loving space. Like, this may bring up some tears because it's just beautiful thinking about it. Being held in such a loving space without any judgment. may have been the first time I had experienced that.
Wow. Wow.
Like, and because you go in with those your negative cognitions that you've had your whole life, that you're not enough, you'll never be enough, whatever that may be. And so there's such a disconnect for that internal goodness. And so just coming back to that basic thing, and Joan, the other healers, coaches, and the members being held in that loving space, I think was transformative and such a huge part of the program.
Yeah. Thank you for giving words to what love does in terms of
Yeah.
worthiness. And as you were saying that, I was wondering, how does that relate to secure attachment? Like, we hear this a lot these days. That didn't have a secure attachment. What's your attachment style? But
Right.
when you were talking, I could feel what you were saying in the root of my body. Like, your emotions just brought me into my body to feel that with you.
Yeah.
And I could feel like the fabric really being weaved. I know that sounds very visual, but like,
Yeah.
so can you speak to what you just brought emotion and presence to, and what that means in terms of the like clinical discussions of attachment or secure attachment? Are those related to each other?
Very much so. Very, very much so. And I think that that's when I receive feedback from my patients about the therapy that I provide, a lot of times what they'll say is, one of the biggest pieces is you being so compassionate and never judging with whatever I come in with. And I run a lot of groups, whether spiritual groups or female-led groups or PTSD groups, and that is a big piece of that. Everyone holding that space for each other. And what that creates is a corrective emotional experience. And with a corrective emotional experience, we rewire, right?
Okay. Corrective emotional experience. Thank you for those
Yeah.
words. So, meaning
Yes.
by being in a place where you're held and you're loved and you're not judged and there's care and concern, that's a corrective emotional experience in which
Yeah.
the person can feel that in their body and have a new experience
Yeah.
in community or in connection in their body, which is like an original, like you just described an original experience.
Yeah. Very
Right?
much so. Very much. And I remember feeling that with Laura the first time, pretty much every time we did the soul retrievals, but definitely the first time it was just like, wow. And part of me was like, what the hell do I do with this? Because it was so new. Like, I don't even know what step is next? Like, I know my old programming. I got that down pat. The uncomfortable stuff, I'm good, right? But this new way of being, of like, wow, how do I now operate in the world? Right? What does this actually look like? And I think that that's where inner alignment then pulls in that other piece of the rewiring, right? Now you've had this experience, you know what it feels like. What are some things that you can do to maintain yourself being in that space and to create new procedural networks so you know where to go, so you don't have to go back to those old ways of being?
I love all of these technical terms for what we call the rewiring
Yeah.
practices, right? Because we have to. So you have this original experience in soul retrieval of deep worthiness, deep love, deep
Yeah.
peace, or freedom.
Safety.
It's different than it's different for everybody. Like, really what they're needing is nuanced and very, very specific to their
Mhm.
childhood trauma. So you have this original experience, and then it's in your body. There's like an aha in your cell
Yes.
in a way, right? Like
Yes.
a novel experience. And then there's the fortifying of those new neural pathways or auto-associated networks. And I'm appreciating the words that you're using to describe that, because I've just tried to cobble words together to explain an experience. So yes, so then we have to fortify those networks so that you can sustain it. And then how does that look with my husband? How does that look
Yeah,
with my child? How does that look with my clients? How does
with
that,
myself, even,
yeah,
right?
with myself, right?
So, yeah, and I think that that's what's occurring when we're doing those soul retrievals in that place. And, the child self, I do adult self, child self. It's just easier for me to see it that way. But the child self is getting those needs met. That's the corrective emotional experience, right? And not only are you providing it within that trauma memory or dimension, but you're also providing it within the group,
Mm.
right? And you're also providing it with each of the individuals coming in to meet with you, whether it's the coach, whether it's you, whether it's another healer. So you're getting the correctional emotional experience from several places, which is like, right? And so then I think that strengthens the rewiring.
It does. It makes it a more dynamic or even holographic
Yep.
experience. And, we could geek out on the
Yes,
dimensions
we
of
could.
consciousness as well.
I was just
But
going to go there.
yeah, I mean, that might be Jessica 2.0, right? So, but it gives the experience in so many different forms, and that speaks to why we work as teams, because it's one thing to receive love from one person and
Right.
in their dosha. Rose and I just spoke for an episode on the doshas, right? A lion's love, a bird's love, a bear's love. Like,
Mhm.
what is love in this context? What is love there and here? And how do they do love? Or, oh, she's got fiery love and she's got slow and steady love, right? Or just
Mhm.
it's not even mentally processed, but it's a felt experience. And what happens when Kim says something she shouldn't say and screws up, or like, how do people make right something that's not right, or anything? Like, what is a lived human experience of love in this messy world that we live in? And
Mhm.
I think that's critical for healing.
Yeah. When we can rework it in the present moment, right?
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. And within my PTSD groups, one of the things we've been working on is how do we rework the racial stuff, and especially with the elections and the racial tension, and within this primarily male dominated group. I mean, it's one female and like 8 men, right? So how do we do that? How do we have the dialogue about this, which is corrective for all of us?
Wow.
It's huge.
Can you come back and we talk about that more? Because
Probably.
that's juicy right there. And I know those are topics that are near and dear to your heart as well,
Yeah.
that lived
Hmm.
experience. As you're talking, I'm thinking of, I think the place where this happened for me, the experience of receiving care and love, was when I checked myself into a psychiatric hospital when I was 15 years old. So I had active bulimia from 13 to 15, and I had the sacred privilege of going inpatient for 99 days. And it was right before the mental health field stopped funding inpatient care for mild disorders like depression or eating disorders. And so I got right in at the last moment, and I checked myself into the hospital. And the most fascinating experience there was that there were people there to care for me, or to help meet my needs, or to listen to my problems, or to gather in a circle, or to even hold me accountable, or
Hmm.
right. So it was the first time I had ever really been held in a space of that, having grown up with my own childhood trauma and my own experiences that were lived in my body. And those
Hmm.
99 days were critical in building within my inner fabric what it felt like to be cared for. Like, I have constipation. Oh, we'll help get you a remedy. Like, really simple things
Yeah. Right.
that I had never really experienced.
You were seen.
I was seen, I was
Seen, you were
received,
heard.
I was cared for, I was taken
Yes.
care of, right? And so we all have different capacities. Man, like as a mother of three daughters, I'm always falling short of being able to be a caregiver like I really want to be, or the vision I thought I could be, right? So I just want to honor the fact that it's hard to be a human. It's hard to meet our own needs, and it's hard to meet the needs of others around us. And I think in
Mhm.
any family, healthy or unhealthy, trauma, big T or little t trauma, there are going to be these gaps. And
Yes.
our human experiences in life can be, if we allow ourselves to redefine ourselves in the moments of the present moment, then we get to have, like I had but two very good, solid, earthy best friends that were able to be friends to me growing up. And I also had my husband who had a solid root in sacral chakra, who could be a partner who taught me those things.
Hmm.
So, we have the opportunities to rebuild this in life through our current life experiences as
Yeah.
well.
If we choose to take them,
Right. It doesn't have
right?
to be in a therapeutic modality.
No,
And
not at all.
just my husband, he was the nice guy, and everything in my cells in my body was like, yeah, I'm not really interested in nice guys, right? Like you have a solid root in sacral chakra. I prefer the people who are going to screw me over. Thank you very much. I was cross-wired. But there was
Yeah.
an ideology in me that said, no, he's going to be nice to you. And this is the route that you're going to go in life. And it's not going to be comfortable, and it's not going to feel natural, and it's
Hmm.
going to maybe give you a little like whatever, like suffocation or trapped or too nice or whatever, but like
Uh-huh.
you deserve this, Kim, in this lifetime. So it was an ideology. It didn't feel right. It didn't resonate really what
Yes,
was in my body, but I knew I wanted the kindness and the care and that level of safety in my relationships. So I chose that even though it wasn't resonant or didn't feel natural. And over the last 27 years, with his healthy parented self, I was like, he can have the hard conversations without slamming a door and walking away.
uh-huh. Yeah.
Like he has very much taught me a secure attachment, I think, just to kind of round out that piece of what it is to be worthy of someone showing up and staying. And
Yes.
that's available to us in our daily lives.
It truly is in many, many different ways. Hmm. But
Yeah.
we have to see those opportunities, you know?
We have to
I think we
choose
really
them, and
do.
then we have to do our somatic work within ourselves to be able
Mhm.
to rework the part of ourselves that's pushing away the thing that really might be resonant at the next level of consciousness.
For sure. And the fear, we have to work through that fear that holds so many of us back. Yeah.
Mhm.
Just one more point with the IA, with the inner alignment program. I think another big piece, not only with the corrective emotional experience, the love, the you truly are good, right? And just the respect, maybe perhaps that's part of it, is the respect from one individual to another, right? I see you, I respect you. We don't have to be the same, but I love and respect you regardless.
Yeah.
And so, in addition to that, I think there's a level of empowerment that IA offers people, which sometimes can be very different for mainstream therapies, right? Because sometimes there's a one up, one down approach within psychotherapy, like this
Like an
person.
authority? Is that what you're talking
Yes,
about?
yeah,
Yeah.
like this is an authority figure. They know, they're the doctor, da, 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 da. But in reality, they may be trained in techniques, but the individual is the one that knows themselves the best.
So the personal empowerment, like the participant or the client of inner alignment, has their own soul's truths, and they know they're healing. That healing actually is unlocked within them through their own pathway of finding it. And we're just kind of like the
Yeah.
person with the flashlight in the cave saying, hey, anything over there? Anything over there? And as a facilitator, we're not the authority over them, and we don't know better than them. It's unlocking their inner awareness. And then it's kind of like teaching someone how to fish rather than giving them the fish, because
Mhm.
once they are able to know the pathway into their soul's truths, they got that for life, which is really empowering.
Yeah, pathway to their truths, but also how to heal anything that if something still's coming up, right? They can go back in with the tools, whatever those may be that they want to use, and heal those spots. And I think a lot of times with traditional psychotherapies, it's like, oh, I got to go back to therapy again. So one of the things I try to do with my individuals is, what is your soul telling you right now? What does your spirit say? What is your gut telling you? Let's go with that, right?
Yeah. And
And
then you're
and
wiring them up into their inner truth rather than looking
yes.
externally for their truths. They're able to go in and really activate their inner listening. And it's beyond inner listening. It's like, can I feel what's resonating? Can I feel
Yes.
my truth? Right?
Yes. And it's that physical piece, right? That's the somatic piece too, is let's slow this down. What does that feel like in your body, right? To whatever, that empowerment. What does that empowerment feel like in your body,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
how can you get yourself back there if you need to?
Yeah.
Because you can, right? My belief system is that everybody has their own answers within. I'm just kind of like there as a little guide or facilitator. And sometimes I need to quiet my guide and facilitator because I trained in psychology, right? We're the ones talking. And I remember that being something I had to work on when I was doing your program was, don't, you need to shush, just shush. They know.
Stop. That's a really hard part for people who are clinicians that come through inner alignment
Mhm.
certification is the analysis and the talking and the knowing, because you're trained to need to know as a clinical therapist. But in inner alignment practitioner certification, we're training you how to not know. We're training you
Yes,
out
the
of
opposite.
knowing and into curiosity and innocent perception so that you can have the practitioner tools to elicit someone's soul's truth, because they're the only ones that know.
You got it. You got it.
And that's empowerment right there. So there's a couple of things.
Yes.
Another tenet of this work is we don't want to create dependency relationships. So we don't want our clients to be dependent on us for them and their continued healing. So we
Mhm.
do teach them how to essentially do soul retrieval on themselves, to go
Yes.
into their body and actually be able to process old vibration, because we
Yes.
don't want them to feel like they have to come back to us. And while they're able to come back to us, if they get really stuck or if something gets, we don't have a lot of graduates coming back and saying, hey, can I have a session? And we see that as a successful measure, as a measure of success, that we've empowered them and we don't have to hear back
Yes.
from them. And the other thing that's important to us, because I've been a part of a lot of spiritual communities, a lot of personal growth communities that are kind of cult-like in the way that they're set up. And so I've studied these organizations, like
Mhm.
what creates this dynamic of the leader knowing everything and other
Yeah.
people like, tell us, dear leader. And I'm like, I ain't gonna be on any pedestal, because the only place from that pedestal to do is to fall. And please keep me out of that. And so it's
Yes.
it's like weaved into the program and to the consciousness of the healers that I ain't your guru, right? I'm
Mhm.
not the one that has your truth. You have your truth. And
Yes.
that's I think how we're
Mhm.
activating, like 33% of the people who do their inner healing become practitioners in this work, which to me is mind boggling. But what it does, I mean, if you take that further, even if you're not going to take this work out in the world and be a practitioner, to actually say to your teenager, oh, what's the worst part about that? To take any of the
Anything.
questioning into our family lives or our work lives, to take any of that instead of being on our high horse and saying, well, blah, 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 and getting the
Yes.
boomerang of that statement back and with our teens or with our coworkers, to actually learn how to take that innocent perception and that curiosity and the honoring of someone else's soul's truth and be able to activate that in all areas of our lives makes us a deeper and just a better human
I,
in
I I
terms of our.
totally agree. And I was thinking that, right. As you were talking, I was thinking, wow, like what a wonderful concept if we could all be in that space and to honor each other wherever they are in their madness of life, right? To honor that and to just be curious about it rather than going into the place of judgment, which
Yeah,
is easier. It's way easier to go into judging people, right?
it so is.
It takes work to be like, help me understand that.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else you want to add as a psychologist in inner alignment? Anything else to share that we didn't hit on yet?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times when people come in, when my patients come into therapy, they're like, they think there's just going to be like a magical thing, and in 5 sessions, my life will be great, and you're going to take those memories away from me, and all is well. And I'm like, okay, let's reframe what might look like. And I think it's a there's many different parts of it, right? There's the rewiring piece that I want to hit. There's the let's getting down into the to real root issues of the trauma piece that we want to hit to meet the unmet needs of the individual. I think that was the piece that was missing in my own therapy,
Mm,
was that my younger self, those needs weren't met
mm,
by me, by anybody. So I think by go with this the soul retrieval that really allowed me to go in and start to meet my own needs, and then to have divine, you know, back that up, if you will, or
yeah.
reinforce that,
Yeah.
was a huge piece, and something that I can then take forward, so that if any during any periods of reactivity that I may have, because we are human and we live in this world, that during those times of reactivity that I can just pause again, figure out what's happening inside of my body, and then go back into those younger parts and offer them what they need as
Yeah.
my adult self, and with the divine with me.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
huge.
it's almost like once you've had an experience of doing that, that's now in your toolbox, or that's a resource for you. Like
Hmm.
understanding those parts and understanding the divine connection to be able to do that. It's a learning process, and I always talk about how it kind of paves the pathway in the body, like
Yes.
snow plows the 5 feet of snow to create that path so that there's a way to do that for ourselves, which is a continued work. It's not one and done. We're like, this is a
Yeah.
lifetime journey of inner work.
Yes.
I get hit with
Correct.
issues left and right. And the more complexity I take into my life, the more inner work I'm doing on myself. And as practitioners, it becomes our way of life. Like we're just doing
Yes.
our work every day. And I have an hour and a half of stillness and quiet every day
Mhm.
to be able
Mhm.
to do my work. So I'm practicing what I'm preaching every moment. Like
Yeah.
no one's ever fixed, but they are healed. Our definition of healed is being able to feel sovereign and steady and connected to ourselves and able to bring ourselves into a regulated state and
Yes.
feeling present and safe and connected and loved and seen and heard.
Mhm.
Like being able to bring ourselves into that space and having good recovery time in our lives when we get
Yes.
knocked off the boat, we can just kind of pull ourselves back in and
Yes.
re-regulate ourselves in every layer of our bodies. And that's what I would call healed. But even when you're in that healed state, you're doing your inner work forever and ever. Amen.
Yeah, and that's the piece. I think, yes, we can use these skills when we're in more of a spiraling place, perhaps, or more of a depression or anxiety. But the reality is if you're using the self-care every day, you're less likely to get into those places of reactivity or spiraling or deep depressions and so on and so forth. And I think that that's something that I have to continuously communicate to my clients, that you have these skills. We're going to do the EMDR. We're going to do whatever treatment here you want to work with, but that's not going to be the end all be all.
Right.
There's other work that needs to be done.
Yeah. Or self-care. There's self-care that's preventative and protective in your daily life, that when you do it, you're going to feel resilient. And when you don't do it, you might feel less resilient.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Self-care is a daily thing. Like, we don't just throw that out the window
Right.
when we're done whatever program we're doing.
Yeah. And sometimes we have to rewire people out of thinking that it's work. It's really just an act of self-love to be able to sit with yourself and tend to yourself. And that's
Yes.
a paradigm shift for a lot of people, to actually luxuriate and feel like it's your favorite time of day rather than something you have to get done.
Yes.
So that consciousness shift, I think, is one that we all have to, get ourselves into. But then I think once you get hooked, you're hooked.
Oh, you're totally hooked. Like, now I'm just want to spend all this time with myself.
Right? Isn't that funny? It's like, oh, life is a distraction from my own inner connection. And it's not. We take it with us. But we would develop such a sense of inner connection and stillness that feels really restorative, such that you don't need to go on a retreat. Like, you retreat into yourself.
Yes.
And that's
every day. Yeah.
every day. Yeah.
Yep. I love that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So, Jess, this has really only scratched the surface of what I
know.
want to
See what I get to see? I get so excited.
It's really fun. And it's just exciting to have someone here who knows the psychological and evidence-based material that's out there, but also understands the depth of what we're doing here in Inner Alignment. So thank you so much for coming. I know that there's a part 2 coming very soon for us to dig deeper into this. So many blessings, and thanks for being here.
Yes. And thanks again for having me, Kim. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to today's Inner Alignment podcast. If you're ready to dive deeper into your anxiety or depression healing process, learn more about our 2-month Inner Alignment healing program. The healing program addresses trauma on all 6 layers of the body, and the program has been successful for over 400 participants. If you're feeling ready to join the community of healers who provide this sacred and profound healing work in the world, maybe it's time to become an Inner Alignment practitioner. If you think this is your dharma or your life purpose, be in touch. Find out more at KimberlyBeekman.com.